Hello, this is Dr. Nuray Kayakol speaking. I will continue on lecture about LEGB scope lookup rule in Python. Previously, we covered in the first video LEGB lookup rule. Under this headline, we learned variable and the meaning of object, namespaces, scopes, and lookup rule itself. I will continue on Python variables. So I will quickly go over agenda. In this section, you will learn global, local, enclosed, and class scope, and keywords to modify the values of variables. In the next section, I will go over the third video about this LEGB rule for class. In this video, you only see these Python variables. Basically, these are about code execution, and we will see some results. So let's remember, variable was an identity pointing an object. So just remember, honeybee representing variable goes to honeycomb. Actually, it is an object having a value and its memory address. Actually, I'm just go over quickly what we have seen in previous video. If you don't watch, maybe it's better to know this so that you can follow this Python variables. This is another definition of variable. Let me read. A variable is reference to an object. You see object and variable name, honeybee, pointing or it's a reference to an object having a value and a memory address. So I will skip this part. If you are interested in, you can watch previous video. The only remember ID built-in function will tell you the memory address of an object. We have seen this, and this is the error, name error. I will skip this part again, and then namespace and scopes. Here is the LEGB scope rule in lookup rule in Python. So Python follow this procedure to find the value of variable. Starts from local scope, enclosed scope, and then global scope. Built-in scope is already available in Python. So in the next section, you will see these three procedure, how Python finds the value of a variable. Let me tell you what are the Python variables. There are three types: global, local, and non-local. So let me go over one by one. Global variable is the variable defined in the global scope. So in order to understand this, perhaps it's better to describe also local variables. When you define a function or class, if you define a variable, then those variables will belong to local scope, and those variables are local variables, very narrow scope or piece of section of the code. So if you define variables outside of the local scope, I will go back to definition of global variables, then you define global variable, and those scopes will be the global scope. So sometimes it is necessary to define functions in functions, that is the nested functions. If you define variable in nested functions, that means you create non-local variables. Just I define the variables and their definitions, but let's see each of them explicitly. Now, this is the piece of code. In the first line, a variable x is defined and its value is cat. That is value of, actually x is assigned to cat. And then a function is defined with the def keyword. The name of the function is animal. For the time being, we don't know what to define in animal function, so we use pass keyword. So you can just type pass, and then outside of this function, we call function animal in and then parentheses. So when you look at this piece of code, local scope will belong to a section defined in a function animal. That's the local scope. Outside of this local scope is defined as the global scope. So x variable is a global variable because it is defined in a global scope. For the time being, no variable is defined in animal functions, so there is no variable in local scope. These are very simple showing what are local scope and global scope. Actually, the definitions are very clear. But the problem is when you have several function inside of one function, that is nested functions, actually this lookup rule is not so simple. Then let's see, understand what are globe scopes and local scope in this piece of code. You see the local scope is defined inside of the function, so you can define your local variables in this function. In global scope is the outside of this function. So you see the blue regions I typed as global scope. So you can define variables on the top if you want at the bottom, and then maybe you can call this function do something. So this is the locations where you can define your variables. In yellow region you can define your local function, and in blue regions global variables can be defined. Why these are important? Because this is about life of object or variable defined by these scopes, and sometimes you may or you may not reach variables. So if you type a variable somewhere in function or in local scope, it depends on how you write your code, but it will not be easily accessed from the outside of the code, that is the global scope. If you want to use one variable everywhere in the program, so define at the top or outside of the function. But if you define a variable inside of local scope with the same name, then the value of a variable will be different. We will see examples later on. Here is the next nested functions. Two functions are defined. The first one, I just typed function as a name of the function, and then the second one, function dash out dash. So you see one letter will change the name, so they become different functions. Again, local scope shown with the yellow section, so you can define your variables here as a local variable. Outside of this function will be the enclosed scope, because the two functions are defined. One is inside of the other one. So if you delete this def keyword from the top, so it will be similar to previous one or this one. But here there are two functions. So if you define a variable in this green area, that means this is an enclosed scope and your variable is enclosed. So it will be not easy to reach this variable, and in order to modify this value or variable inside, you should use some keywords you will see later on. Again, if you want to change the variable inside of a function, you can use non-local keyword. Just that is when you define a variable with this keyword, your variable will exist both inside of function and outside of the function. You will see some examples here. If you notice, I've defined two keywords. Pass. The first one belongs to inner function, the other one is outer function. Because I don't know what to type yet, or then just I used keyword pass. So you can type and run this, so you won't get any error messages. Now, you can define your code in terms of function or class. Let's compare how local and global scopes is called in different sections of the function and class. You see, both pieces of code more or less are equal, only I define function first, animal, in the second class, animal class is created, because I don't know what to put inside, just pass keywords. So inside of def function you have a local scope, outside of the local scope you have a global scope. But when you use class keyword instead of def, you will have class scope. More or less this same meaning. Again, global scope is scope because it's outside of the class is defined. For Python beginners, maybe you will notice that this is how I call function animal, the name of the function and two parentheses. But if you use a class, or if you define a class, you need to call like this: a is equal to the name of the class. This is a way to create an object. As you know, Python is object-oriented programming. The next section you will see what is global scope and global variable. From now on, you will see explanation in triple code. So if you type this triple code, so you can write long sentences and program will not show any error messages. So this is very good, so you can write whatever you want. outside of this nomenclature section, this is the piece of code. I want to explain this feature because later on you will see in a similar format, so you need to get familiar how I defined, because you see X is defined as cat, this is global scope, and a function animal. Then I added a print statement. So this is just a definition of variable and function, but the code itself is not complete. So in order to run this code, one should write animal, that is the calling of animal, and then print statement to print global scope. So think that these two lines will be added to the bottom of this piece of code when you execute this lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines piece of code, you will get this output. So you see there's a 3 arrows showing output of this program. First, it will print local scope, x is equal to whatever its value, because this line calls this function, and what this function does print the value of x. You see, this is a global scope, and the value of x is valid inside of animal function. But vice versa is not possible. If you define a variable in this function, so you cannot use outside of function. This is the basic difference between global scope and a local scope. So if you define a variable inside of the function, that variable only alive in that function. So you have to define, actually be aware of where to define your variables. In this output section, as you see, both local and global values of x value are equal to same cat string, because I didn't define any variable yet inside of this animal function. Okay, how about this one? The same code, but this time I changed def with a class keyword. So animal becomes not a function but a class. Then I define a is equal to animal animal in parentheses, and then a dot x. This is how you access the value of variable in class object. It's a kind of object-oriented programming notation. How you access the instances of class. That just put dot and then give the name of the variable. Here it gives attributed error. It says animal object has no attribute to x. That means if I write like this, global variable x is not available in animal class. But if in the previous example, if I use def keyword, that means this piece of code is a function. It's possible to access global variable, and then you see it's possible to get the value and print. But if you do the same thing with the class keyword, it gives attributed error, because it says nothing related to x is defined inside the class. This is the first difference between function and class. That's why I wanted to show this. Let's go through the second example. So what I added, I add x is equal to big cat. That means I define the local variable in local scope, and this print statement will give the value of x defined in the function animal. So this is I mean again, to run this piece of code you have to also type these two lines. So it calls the animal function and then print the global variable x defined in global scope. So from output you see the value of x is different in global and local scope because we define different actually we assign different values to variable x in function and outside of the function. Let's go over to another example. Here is the question: why I am getting an unbound local error when the variable has a value? So this one is very important because you might get several same error messages. So let's see what is written in this piece of code. First, x is cat, that is global scope, good, and then definition of animal function. What we learned, one can reach global variable inside of a function, then programmer types this print statement because he or she wants to know what is value of x in this function. So this is a small piece of code, but if you think you have several functions, if you have a very long code, so you may not know exactly what's the value of previous value of x, so it's possible to put a print statement and see what it is and then give a name. So x is equal to big cat and then writing another print statement. It is logical, isn't it? But if you type this code and then add and then call this function and then add this print statement, you will get unbounded local error. Says local variable x referenced before assignment. So in previous video you learned that variable reference an object. That's why this keyword is important. Before assignment means no variable actually no value is assigned to the x. If it is assigned, it is going to reference an object, because here value of variable name is defined x, but the value is unknown because program first. Do you remember in lookup rule? Program first will check this function inside of it will look for value of x in this function. It will not start from the first line. If I go back to if I show you this one, you see LEGB scope lookup rule first starts from the local scope. It doesn't start from the global scope because it's on the third step. But if I find where we were, here, this is global scope in the third step. You see, Python first look up this animal function. So didn't see this first line yet, and then looks for the value of x, but it is defined in the next step. You see, at the next line. So now it is possible, and you can print local value of x. So you cannot use print statement before and after about this local variable x. If you remove this line, you will get rid of error messages. Okay, let me explain once more. If you type a print statement before and after about local variable, Python will give you unbound local error saying local variable x referenced before assignment. So because it finds actually it looks for a value of variable. So this first line needs to be removed, and the position of print statement after the assignment of variable value is correct position. Now we can compare the piece of code in this red box. You will get error messages. So just because of the unbound local error, if you want to get rid of this error, just remove this part, and then it will run without any problem. So the first print statement inside of the animal function will give you assigned big cat value, and then we didn't touch to the global variable written on the top, so it's a cat. Let's continue with the another example. Again, unbound local error. Let's see. Here x is equal to cat, again as a global variable inside of the animal function. Now it takes attributes from outside. A cat type is added as a new variable. Here x is equal to cat type plus x. This is again unbound local error. Why? X is defined outside of this function. So you might think a global variable is available inside of a function. That's true. So also you see in the animal is again reads another variable as a cat type, so I defined as wild. So it has to adding two string with a plus sign, so you might expect type of cat is wild cat. So why Python gives this error, this line? Because x appears on the right hand side and the left hand side. Again, program will look for value of x. It is not defined yet because it appears on the left as well. So this will be the source of error. Again, the error message is the same, local variable x referenced before assignment, because in the lookup procedure, Python starts from the local scope that will check the value of x inside of this function. So it is not written in the piece of code, yes, on the top of the function is written, but this is the global scope. As I explained previously, this is um, Python will finish the checking the value of variable first inside of function, and then will go up. And then this is because x and here, x and here and here, maybe this variable name is same, but the scopes are different. That's why it gives this unbound local error. So how are we going to solve this, or how we get rid of this error message? So all you need to do to type this global keyword. So if you type global x, then program will reach this cat, and then you see type of cat is wildcat, this which is what we want to do. So what you will learn if you use variable both on the left and the right hand side. So in order to not to get unbound local error, use global keyword. So you can reach this value of x. So this is another example. This time x has an integer variable instead of a string. So x plus equal to sign 1. Actually, we use this kind of notations. This is actually x is equal to x plus 1. It is not different than this one, only the how can I say, type. It's a kind of writing short way of writing. It's easy to follow the code, so we use this plus is equal to sign together, but we will have again same error messages. Yes, x on the right hand side, not on the left hand side, but actually this means x is equal to x plus 1. So you will, so again you have to type global x then to get rid of this error messages. You see number of cats is 11, because you see x value of x is 10, then in the animal it is added plus 1, so it becomes number of cats is 11. So if you use this kind of increment in the function, so not to forget to type global x. Again, another error messages, name error. So actually this is very good example. I previously explained, but let me explain once more. You see, you define a variable y inside of animal, so it's in the local scope. So this even if you call this animal, you can't get the value of y, because y is, because outside of this function you are in the global scope. In the global scope you can't access a local variable defined in local scope or in a function. So then this is another name error, because it cannot find the value of y, it's not defined. So here how we can get rid of this error. So just add one line bottom of the definition of y is equal to small kitty, return y, then you won't get any error messages. Yes, until now you learned global and local scopes in function. How about in class? In this time, instead of def, I used class keyword, so it becomes not a function but a class. So it is not different than function, but the only thing you have to create an object saying a is equal to animal that's calling a class function. So in order to reach the value of, actually this time a variable becomes attribute of this sorry, not attributes, it's instance of a class, so you have to use dot notation to get the value of instance of a class, this time x. You see, when I use this first, if I when I create a variable object name a, so what it prints class scope x, which is big cat, and then I want to reach this value x outside of this class. So actually they are same, but just to show how to access this value of object x, a dot x, and then the next step to get this global scope value of x, that is the cat. This is how you do to accessing the class and global variables in such a piece of code. So let's see with the nice picture, actually not different than previous one. So the first line outside of the class is the global scope. Inside of the class, whatever we do, we can define variable or manipulate the variable. This time this variable becomes instance of a class, so this section becomes class scope. This is how you print the value of x. Now this piece of code will tell you where not to use global keyword. If I type global x and then get the value of x is equal to cat, again it will give you an attribute error. So you are not supposed to use global inside of class. So if you get rid of this line, you will get rid of variable, get rid of this one. This because why? What is the difference between this one and this one? The same piece of code. If you type def instead of class, you won't get any error messages. But if you type class and inside of class, if you define a global x, it gives you attribute error. But for function, it doesn't give any error. This is so this is how global keyword is used. So this is the this is the example. If you define global inside of a function, you modify it both in the function and in the global scope. Here this piece of code will give you the same value big cat for the x, although it is defined as cat in the global scope. So you need to be very careful when you use this global keyword. On the top, you see both local and global scope. The value of x is different, but when you modify and give a new name, global variable inside of animal function and outside will be the same. So this is the nested function. That means there is an inner function and outer function. Outer function is animal, inner function is line. So if you define a global variable x, so if you give a new variable values, that means large cat, so you modify value of x both in function and in the previous function or global scope, it becomes a large cat. Actually, we use global keyword inside of nested functions. If you suppose that, now let's talk about non-local. So you learn that if you define a function inside this function, whatever you do is local scope and local variables are defined. So you might think that you can use a non-local keyword here and change the value of variable x inside of animal function. So that is error, because it says syntax error, no binding for non-local x is found, because non-local variable is supposed to modify variable name inside of a nested function. If you use inside of a single function, so you will get this syntax error. So this is first thing you need to learn, where not to define non-local keyword. This is also valid for class. If you define non-local keyword inside of a single class, you will get the same syntax error messages. Let's continue. Here is a nested function. Line is the inner function, animal is the outer function. Here you see a line is called inside of outer function animal. So if I put a print statement inside of inner function, it is going to print the value of x, which is in enclosed scope. The value is big cat. Why? Because I didn't define anything in the line. Then in this function, the value of x in the outer function will be printed as the value of x. So actually this is like a single function, because you didn't define anything about local variables. So program or Python just print the value of x, which is in enclosed scope. Enclosed scope means something between inner and outer function. Let's continue. Now this is actually the same piece of code, just it will show you the location of scopes. We have nested functions. The first inner function line, so this blue piece of code or section of the code will represent local scope, and enclosed scope is in the region between the outer function animal and inner function line. Outside of this region, x is equal to cat is the global scope. So you see three different scopes in this piece of code. So you will so if you want to change the value of x or enclosed variable, you need to use non-local keyword. This is actually print statements. In previous example, if you put print statements in different scopes, you will get different values of x. This is actually a very good presentation or representation of Python nested functions, because you can define different values of x in different sections of the code. This is a very good example. If you want to change a value of enclosed variable, you can use a non-local x. But when you say like this, whatever you see, line is the inner function, so you defined non-local keyword inside of this inner function, and then you gave a large cat. When you do this, everything inside of nested function becomes a large cat. You see, local scope, large cat, outer function, large cat. Why this is enclosed scope is appears as big cat? Because it is previously because of the location of print statement, because it is used before actually program will search inner block, so non-local keyword is not used yet. That's why the value of big cat before changing its value as a big cat. But when non-local variable x is defined and x becomes large cat, then you see the value of outer function x becomes large cat. So non-local variable x changes the value of x in nested functions, but the global variable cat still the same. Global scope x is equal to cat. So if you define a global x here, if you type global x is equal to large cat, you will print all the values of cat becomes whatever you define here. This is another example. So maybe if you get confused with this, so you can type before non-local keyword and then after non-local keyword. Actually the same piece of code, but it will understand how non-local keyword changes value of local variable inside this nested functions. Okay, we come to the class, so I will let me finish here the second video of LEGB scope lookup rule. In the next video we will go over how LEGB rule is applied in class. See you later on.